Welcome to What's the Scenario with PLRB, where we explore claims and coverage scenarios relevant to insurance professionals. I'm Alicia Watley.
I'm Mike Rode.
I'm Tim Havler.
And I'm John Hurley, Coverage Counsel at PLRB.
Welcome back, John.
Yay.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
All right, so you get the question. John, what's the scenario?
All right, in today's scenario, the named insured lives with his girlfriend in a single-family dwelling. Recently, the house sustained a fire, rendering the home a total loss. The insured wants coverage for a place to stay while his home is being built or rebuilt. He sees that in his HO 00030511 homeowners form, he has a loss of use section. Specifically, the policy states that additional living expenses, or ALE, are covered. The insured wants to know the scope of this coverage and exactly how many bags of M&Ms he can snag from the minibar.
None.
Minibars, are those even a thing anymore?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Alicia. I think now they've replaced them all with the convenience store that's right next to the front desk that charges you $8 for a full bag of Skittles versus $20 for a small bag of Skittles and mini fridge. But yeah, I don't think they exist anymore.
Well, too many people were taking the stuff from the minibar, mini fridge, then trying to replace them with stuff that they bought at the store.
Ooh.
And so, people tried to get sneaky and hotels figured it out. So we all got punished.
Sounds like you have some experience with this snatcheroo thing.
I've traveled a lot. But if there were still mini bars, I'd probably take advantage.
They're hard to resist sometimes. I can remember spending like $20 for like a small handful of mixed nuts one time. And they were the most delicious mixed nuts I've ever had, but
Still.
But
probably,
most expensive.
Not worth $20.
All right, so let's get into it. So, John, when is ALE triggered?
Additional living expense, or ALE, is triggered whenever a covered cause of loss to the resident's premises renders the resident's premises uninhabitable, unfit to live in. The coverage then covers any necessary increase in the insured's living expenses incurred in order to maintain, as near as possible, the household's normal standard of living. So, and the coverage lasts for the shortest period of time it takes to repair the damaged property, or the shortest period of time it takes for the insured to move and start their household elsewhere. So in that way, ALE is similar to the extra expense coverage we find in the commercial forms, in that it's intended to indemnify the insured for increases that the covered loss kind of puts him behind the eight ball. And this is important because, as we all know, with property insurance, under the homeowners, for example, we cover dwellings, other structures, and personal property. Therefore, without this ALE, if your house was rendered a total loss or even partial loss, and it only covered the property itself, any expense to go find a place to live while the covered repairs are being made would be borne by the insured. And so this, in effect, is kind of like a consequential economic kind of coverage for the insured.
Makes sense. Yeah, I'm curious, John, when you talk about expenses, it's been a long time since I handled a additional living expense claim, but it has to be like in addition to what you normally kind of spend for your expenses, right? And what kind of counts as expenses?
Well, you're absolutely right. So first, to answer your first question, yes, it's the insured's duty to prove what their household normal living standard is, and then to show expenditures that are actually incurred that are above and beyond that.
Okay.
But expenses themselves are limited to just that: expenditures, disbursements of money. The insured would not be entitled to anything that would increase their capital or their property. For example, there's a case from 1988 out of Kentucky where the insured sustained a covered loss and they were underinsured for their personal property. And they made the argument that the ALE should cover the shortfall in coverage of the coverage available for the personal property, because that personal property was necessary for them to have to maintain their standard of living.
That's a
Novel
good
argument,
argument.
but the judge saw right through that and just said, "Yeah, no, that's this is not a way to do an end around because you're underinsured for personal property. This is, again, he underlined the fact that this is not something that is supposed to be permanent. These are expenditures."
John, you just mentioned the analogy to extra expense in the commercial realm. Does that argument ever work under extra expenses? So if the insured um, has a pizza place and they just need to go down the street and rent a new place and get ovens in there as quickly as possible, even if those ovens are a permanent expenditure, could that be an extra expense?
Yes, it could be, depending on the wording of the policy, but that's how extra expense is slightly different, because it, the insurer wants to give incentive for the insured to get back on their feet as quick as possible. So if you can make that expenditure and say, you got a place in your neighborhood and you need to put in these ovens to continue your pizza parlor, have at it, because ultimately we will likely pay less to do that than we would to have your business income loss. So it is slightly different, and the wording, depending on the policy, is in there, but it is slightly different for extra expense.
So, and so we're clear, expenses you said are whatever's reasonable. So that would be your meals, your transportation, anything else that it would cover.
Right, absolutely. Obviously, it's the dwelling itself, somewhere to live, somewhere to reside. It could cover meals at restaurants if if you don't have like a long-term stay hotel where they have a kitchen, um, and that could even include alcohol and tips. Um,
Yeah.
your laundry, to go out and do your laundry. You probably have to do it at a point operated place. So all things like that are a part of your day-to-day living. Anything that would increase that.
Well, if alcohol is a day to day living. That's another one.
For medicinal
No,
purposes only.
wait, no judgment or anything.
Right.
Just
You
saying.
have to, yeah, you have to show that it would be normal and this is more. So
Okay.
Mm. Okay, well, I'll be the one to ask the complicated question. Sorry about this, John, but the girlfriend, that I think is where it gets confusing because so if the man is the named insured in this case, we know that he's going to get a hotel. Now it seems like if the girlfriend was living there, then well, I don't know if she would stay in his tiny
Yeah.
hotel or if it would be in a house they rent, or there's probably options there. But from the policy coverage perspective, what do we say about the girlfriend?
okay, so the girlfriend, live-in girlfriend, obviously a member of his household. And the language is clear in the HO 030511 that it's the insured. She's not an insured, although she is a member of his household. It's the insured's expenses that will be covered once they're increased. So, for example, if he paid the mortgage on the single family dwelling, then obviously, yes, the rental dwelling she could go to and stay, under his ALE. Same thing with if you put it into a long term hotel. Now, an example of something that arguably is not covered for the girlfriend would be in a lot of instances, because you're going to be relocated, you might have a longer commute to get to work. So let's say she drives and she's spending more gas. Now, unless he pays for her gas, that's not his household expense. That's not his household expense. She's a member of the household, but that was her expense. He wasn't covering. And she's not an insured in general, and she's specifically not a named insured. Now, what's interesting is in the HO 322 version, ISO added some language to slightly modify this. And let me just read this for you. This is how it reads now in the 22 form, the latest form. We'll cover necessary increase in living expenses incurred by you, the insured, and residents of your household who are A, your relatives, or B, other persons under the age of 21 and in your care or the care of a resident of your household who is your relative. so that the household can maintain its normal standard of living. Now, that arguably wouldn't change the whole gas mileage thing for the girlfriend because although she is a resident of the household, she's not a resident relative. What it would change, for example, is let's say instead of the girlfriend, let's say she's a grown daughter of the named insured. Same scenario with getting in a car and having to drive further. In this case, that gas mileage, even though the named insured doesn't pay for her gas, would be covered because she's a member of the household and she's a resident relative. So they kind of acknowledge that there are those situations where it could get dicey with, and they want to make sure you're covering um, not only members of the household, but of course the resident relatives. So they did slightly change that, and it is arguably an expansion in the scope of coverage.
I have a weird question. So, based on the girlfriend, she's a live-in girlfriend. Maybe she still has her own place. Does she have to Does she have to prove via like ID or something that she is an actual full-time resident of the home?
Arguably, yeah. I mean, the insured has whenever you're looking at the idea of household. For example, there are many different kinds of households that we have in this day and age in this country, right? You have, uh, say, you're a divorced child. You have two households, perhaps your mom and your dad, or you have, um, you have a son or daughter who lost their house for whatever reason, and they come to live with you. And during that 6 months, but they planned on moving back. So it was a temporary thing. Does that constitute a household? So that's a question of fact that you would want to look into. Um, it's much like what an insured is being a relative member of the household. But as far as that goes, I mean, if she can prove, okay, she's got another dwelling, but you just look at the facts. How often is she there? And that would probably give you your answer.
So, John, riddle me this one. Say the house is not fit to live in, but there was no covered loss that caused home to be inhabitable. There be any ALE coverage in that scenario?
Unfortunately, no. According
Oh,
to the wording, again, what you need is you have to have a covered cause of loss to the resident's premises that renders the premises uninhabitable. So because it's not a covered cause of loss, they're not going to give you the ALE. So the thinking is, well, we're going to cover when it's covered, we're going to cover the repair, the reconstruction. Therefore, we'll put you up. But if we're not on the hook for the damage, well, then you should be on your own also for the ALE.
So
makes
this
sense.
word uninhabitable is kind of throwing me a little bit. I'm imagining what if it's partially uninhabitable? So say the kitchen is knocked out, but everything else in the house is fine. You can sleep, you can shower, everything else.
Yeah, good question. In that case, what you would probably do is to say, uh, for meals, if you're completely incapable of cooking, no stove, no microwave, no oven, no refrigerator, then not you wouldn't get the hotel or the tantamount the equivalent rental dwelling, but certainly you would be incurring extra expense to eat, and so that would be covered. So I think when you're talking about something like a kitchen, something like a master bedroom or bedrooms, that's when we're talking about something being uninhabitable. If you have damage to your finished basement, you can still live in the house. So try to look at it. The insurance company tries to work with the insured, but that's a two-way street about what it really means to be uninhabitable. And again, uninhabitable is a question of fact. We can't say for sure, obviously, burned to the ground, uninhabitable, but there are some close calls.
Well, I've got another scenario for you. So, say fire unin, fire to my home, uninhabitable. I had a pre-planned visit. So my mom, who lives in a whole other state, was planning to come visit me at a certain time. It's already set in stone. Flights are ready. She was going to stay with me, and now I have nowhere to stay.
Mm.
Will the ALE cover her hotel as well for the trip?
Uh, the answer is probably yes, because the idea was very important in your scenario that the plan was pre-loss. So mom's going to come visit on a certain date, and as you said, the airline tickets were purchased and what have you. So that was already going to be a part during the period of restoration, during the period of reconstruction of the home. That was already going to be a part of the insured's household to host his mother. And therefore, you know, if she didn't, you know, share his hotel room, arguably they would put her up because again, it was set in stone. Now, contrast that with this: if the shoe were on the other foot, you're going to see your mother, and the trip was planned, and during that time is the period of reconstruction due to a covered cause of loss that renders your home uninhabitable. That's not increasing your household costs because you were flying to your mom's anyway. You already paid for that. So slightly different, but again, because you were going to host your mother, that probably should be covered by the ALE, but not if you were going to visit her.
At least for that week or so that you're house visiting her.
Right.
But how about the most important question of all, John? What about my pets, little Bonsai and Bozzy? Do they get to go with me to the hotel? What's going to happen to them?
Oh, we can't forget the pets because those of us who have pets realize that they are just as much as part of your family and
There it
thus
is.
your household. So if you rent a dwelling that doesn't allow pets, or the hotel that is set up for you does not allow pets, then yes, the cost of boarding those pets would be part of the ALE because you boarded your pets in your own house, and therefore you're now expending extra money in order, you know, that they're taken care of. So yes, because again, your household and what your standard is, and if there's an increase, then that's going to be covered.
Right. And they are resident relatives. My dogs.
All right, so we got everyone covered. So, John, what can we take away from the scenario?
Okay, I think three things to take from this scenario is that ALEs triggered only for covered losses that render the residence premises unfit to live in. So you got to make sure it's all three of those things before we even talk about getting into the disbursement of ALE coverage. And then again, it only covers expendables. So not anything that increases property or capital. And then finally, the insured is responsible to establish his or her standard of living and to provide receipts for expenditures that show disbursements of capital beyond that normal. So they have to show what their baseline is so we can then determine whether or not there was an increase. And then you have to show that you actually incurred that increase before the coverage would be.
Very good, John. Learned a lot. Appreciate it. And Mike, where
Yeah?
can an adjuster go to learn more?
Well, Tim, you know, plrb.org, where you find out all this awesome stuff. And if you were to go out there and search something like ALE or additional living, you're going to find policy annotations and keys to those that will explain what those coverages are and what they're all about. You would probably find an awesome adjuster resource sheet on ALE claims and kind of work through an adjuster what they should do as they're investigating and handling these claims. And of course, you're going to find all sorts of coverage questions, just like the cases that John cited that kind of have a court's explanation of why it may or may not be covered. And then Alicia, of course, would you be kind enough to share those with our awesome audience so they can check it out?
Of course. So we can have links to all of the cases that Mike just mentioned. We'll have links to our social media. Oh, we'll also have a recap of today's points from this episode in case you
Oh,
forgot. So um, we also have information on how you can submit your own adjuster story. So get to subscribe, rate us wherever you listen to your podcast. The higher the rating, the more we can do for you guys out there. We love sharing these stories with you. So we'll see you all next time. John, thanks again for joining us.
Hey, John.
Very
Awesome.
welcome. Thanks for having me.
The views and opinions expressed in this resource are those of the individual speaker and not necessarily those of the Property and Liability Resource Bureau, its membership, or any organization with which the presenter is employed or affiliated. The information, ideas, and opinions are presented as information only and not as legal advice or offers of representation. Individual policy language and state laws vary, and listeners should rely on guidance from their companies and counsel as appropriate.